It was supposed to be just another quiet Saturday. The kind where you kick back on your porch, iced tea in hand, enjoying the sun and the sound of your own thoughts. But all that peace vanished the moment I looked out toward my backyard and saw HOA Karen from the HOA marching right through my side gate like she owned the place. And this time, she wasn't alone. Her two kids trailed behind her, already in their swimsuits, giggling and running straight toward my pool like it was some public resort at first. I thought maybe I was seeing things. Maybe they had the wrong house. Maybe this was some weird misunderstanding. But no, HOA Karen made herself perfectly at home, tossed her towel on one of my chairs, and yelled out, "The kids just need to cool off for a bit. You weren't using it anyway." No knocking, no asking, nothing. Just entitlement served with a side of chlorine. Now, I've had my fair share of run-ins with this woman. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know the type she's. The self-appointed neighborhood watch, lawn inspector, and noise police all rolled into one. She loves to send out passive-aggressive emails about fence paint colors and trash can placement. But this crossed a whole new line. I stood there, stunned, watching her kids splash around in the deep end like it was their weekend getaway. And then it hit me: I had the power to do something. The gate was unlocked when she came in, but it didn't have to stay that way. So, without saying a word, I walked over, shut the gate, and turned the lock. Then I went back to my porch, sat down in my chair, and watched. Let's just say, what happened next had Karen completely losing her cool. And it only got crazier from there. You're not going to believe how far she went when she realized she was locked in. Karen didn't notice right away that I had locked the gate. She was too busy scrolling on her phone while her kids splashed around, completely unaware they were now sealed inside someone else's backyard. I sat calmly on the porch, sipping my drink, pretending not to watch, but every few seconds, I'd glance up just to catch her expression. And then, there it was. That moment when she stood up, walked toward the gate, gave it a pull, and realized it wasn't budging. She rattled it again, this time louder, like it might magically unlock if she shook it hard enough. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. She spun around and looked straight at me, confused, then annoyed, and finally full-on furious. "Did you just lock us in?" she snapped, storming toward the porch like I was the one in the wrong. I stayed seated, calm, and simply asked, "Did you ask before coming in?" Her mouth opened like she had a comeback ready, but for once, words didn't come out right away. Now, let me give you some background. This wasn't the first time Karen had overstepped. So a few weeks back, she left a note in my mailbox criticizing the length of my grass. Before that, she called the HOA on me for inappropriate wind chimes. I wish I was joking, but walking into someone's private yard with kids and jumping into their pool without permission? That was a new level of bold even for her. The thing is, I don't even use the pool that often, but that doesn't mean it's open to the whole neighborhood like it's a community center. Karen had crossed a boundary, literally and figuratively. And now, standing inside a locked fence, she was starting to realize it. But what she did next, not even me was prepared for that. Karen's face turned red, part anger, part embarrassment. She stomped up to the edge of the porch, hands on her hips, demanding I unlock the gate right this second. I just looked at her, calm as ever, and said, "Karen, you walked into my yard without asking. What exactly did you expect?" That only made her angrier. She muttered something under her breath and stormed back to her towel, clearly trying to figure out her next move. Meanwhile, her kids were still in the pool, splashing and laughing, completely unaware of the adult tension boiling around them. That actually made it worse, because Karen didn't want to yell too loud and make a scene in front of them. But I knew her patience was paper thin. The funny thing is, this wasn't just about the pool. This had been building for months. Ever since I moved into the neighborhood, Karen had treated me like an outsider. She acted like the HOA gave her some kind of crown, like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. I'd heard stories from other neighbors about how she let her dog roam into people's yards but filed complaints if someone else's trash bin was a few inches out of place. She had a long history of double standards. I wasn't the first to clash with her, but I was definitely the first to lock the gate. Back inside her temporary cage, Karen took out her phone. I figured she was either calling her husband or dialing the HOA emergency line she always mentioned in those all-caps neighborhood emails. But instead, she started recording. Yep, phone held up, angled just right, narrating loudly about how she and her children were being illegally detained in someone's backyard. I couldn't believe it. She was spinning this into some sort of self-made drama for an audience that didn't exist. But just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, a familiar voice called out from the sidewalk. Someone who had history with Karen and a reason to step in. The voice came from across the street, firm and steady. "Karen, what on earth are you doing in their pool again?" It was Mr. Jensen, the retired firefighter who lived 3 houses down. He had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, and he didn't tolerate nonsense, especially from Karen. He walked slowly toward my fence, eyebrows raised, taking in the scene. Karen pacing inside a locked yard, her kids now quietly clinging to the side of the pool, and me sitting calmly on the porch like it was just another summer afternoon. Karen spun around, clearly caught off guard. "They locked me in," she shouted, pointing at me as if she'd just uncovered some wild injustice. "This is illegal. I'm going to call the police." Her voice cracked a little, like she wasn't sure whether to keep shouting or start negotiating. Mr. Jensen didn't flinch. "You walked into someone else's yard without permission." Again, his tone wasn't angry, just disappointed, and somehow that made the tension even heavier. "I warned you last time, Karen. You can't just treat people's property like it's yours." She opened her mouth to argue, but couldn't find the words. Meanwhile, her kids were now out of the water, wrapped in towels, clearly uncomfortable. The whole situation was spinning fast, and I could feel the neighborhood waking up to the noise. Curtains moved. Couple of neighbors stepped onto their porches. Phones were probably recording by now. Karen realized she wasn't just dealing with me anymore. This had become a neighborhood moment. Then came the sirens. From a distance, that unmistakable sound started growing louder. My heart skipped. I didn't know if she actually called them or if someone else had, but either way, they were coming. Karen's face turned pale, and for the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of what to do. She was cornered, literally and socially. And as the flashing lights started to appear at the end of the street, everyone leaned in to see what would happen next. The police cruiser slowed to a stop right in front of my driveway. Lights flashing but siren off. 2 officers stepped out, calm but clearly alert, scanning the scene as they approached the gate. Karen immediately rushed toward them, dramatic as ever, waving her arms and shouting, "Thank God you're here." He locked me and my kids inside. We're being held hostage in his yard. One of the officers held up a hand to calm her, while the other looked toward me and Mr. Jensen. "Ma'am, we're going to need to hear both sides," the officer said firmly. Karen kept trying to talk over him, but they asked her to step aside for a moment. The other officer turned to me. "Sir, is there a reason she and the children are inside your yard and the gate is locked?" I nodded calmly. "Yes, officer." She entered without permission while I was inside the house. When I came out and saw them in my private pool, I shut the gate. I never told her she could use my yard, let alone bring her kids. Before the officer could respond, Mr. Jensen stepped in. "He's telling the truth. I saw her do this once before, 2 months back. I warned her then. She's part of the HOA, and thinks she can bend the rules. But then came the twist. No one saw coming. Karen's husband pulled up in his SUV, slamming the door and marching across the lawn. Except instead of backing her up, he looked furious. "Karen," he growled, "I told you to stop using that key." The officers turned sharply. "What key?" one of them asked. Karen froze. Her face dropped. Her husband sighed, rubbing his forehead. She had a spare to your side gate made months ago without asking. "I found out last week, told her to return it." The crowd of neighbors watching from their porches started murmuring. The tension was thicker than ever. The cops now had way more questions, and Karen, she wasn't just caught in a lie. She was about to face consequences she hadn't even imagined. The officers exchanged glances, clearly processing everything they just heard. Karen's confident facade was completely shattered, and for the first time she looked small, like someone caught in their own trap. One officer pulled out his notebook and said, "Ma'am, making unauthorized copies of keys and entering private property without permission can be considered trespassing. We'll need to take statements from everyone here." Karen's husband nodded grimly, clearly done with covering for her, as the officers began taking statements. Karen's kids sat quietly on the lawn, towels wrapped tightly around them, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the seriousness. I stayed calm but felt a mix of relief and frustration. This had gone way beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. It was about respect, boundaries, and knowing when to stop. Then, just as things seemed to settle, the unexpected happened. Karen's phone buzzed loudly, and she glanced at the screen with a look of shock. "What is it?" her husband asked. Stepping closer, she hesitated before showing the screen to everyone nearby. It was a message from the HOA president, copied to the entire neighborhood mailing list. The message said, "Due to ongoing complaints about misuse of common facilities and trespassing incidents, the HOA board has unanimously decided to restrict pool access strictly to residents with registered pool keys effective immediately. Unauthorized access will result in fines and possible legal action." A hush fell over the crowd. Karen's face turned even redder, not just from embarrassment, but from the realization that she had just publicly sealed her own fate. The very organization she tried to control was now enforcing rules that would make her past actions impossible to ignore. The officers closed their notebooks, and one said, "For now, we'll give a warning, but continued trespassing could lead to citations." It's clear the boundaries here are serious. Karen stood there, defeated, while I finally unlocked the gate and motioned for her and the kids to leave. As they walked away, I couldn't help but wonder, would this finally teach her to respect others? Or was this just the beginning of an even bigger neighborhood war? After Karen and her kids left, the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual calm. The pool gate stayed locked, and for the first time in months, I felt like my space was truly my own again. Neighbors who had watched everything unfold came by to check in, some sharing their own frustrations about Karen's overthought behavior. It was clear I wasn't the only one who had been dealing with this, but nobody had dared to push back like I did. The HOA's new pool policy sent a strong message. Boundaries matter, and respect isn't optional. It wasn't just about me locking. The gate hit was about standing up for what's right and making sure everyone understood the rules. Karen's attempt to treat my private yard like a public pool backfired spectacularly, but it also sparked something bigger. People started talking openly about fairness, privacy, and community respect, topics that had been simmering under the surface for a long time. Looking back, locking that gate was more than just a small act. It was a turning point. It showed that sometimes you have to draw a firm line, even if it feels uncomfortable or risky. And it reminded me that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean confrontation. Sometimes, quiet confidence speaks louder than words. Of course, not everything changed overnight. Karen didn't suddenly disappear from the neighborhood or stop sending those passive-aggressive emails. But there was a new awareness now, a reminder that actions have consequences, and that respect is earned, not demanded. So if you ever find yourself dealing with an overbearing neighbor or someone crossing boundaries, remember this story. Sometimes, the simplest choice, locking a gate, standing your ground, can set off a chain reaction that changes everything. And that's exactly what happened when Karen brought her kids to swim in my pool. It wasn't just a clash over a backyard. It was a lesson in respect, boundaries, and community.